Thank you, everybody, for being here and joining Senator Donovan and me for a 2020 legislature recap virtual town hall. We are thankful that you've taken the time to tune in on this evening, and we're looking forward to the conversation we're about to have. So I'm just going to introduce myself, toss it to Kerry for the same, and then we'll get into it. So I'm Dylan Roberts. I'm the state representative for House District 26, which is all of Eagle County and Routt County. I live here in Avon. And am glad to be back home after we just concluded the 2020 legislative session last Monday. So we have a lot of interesting things to talk about, some updates to give you, and I'm looking forward to that. So thanks again for joining. Kerry, you want to introduce yourself?
I swear it's not the first Zoom meeting I've done, and I know how to unmute myself. I just got so excited to say hello to you all that I just started talking. But greetings, everyone. Thank you for making time to join us. I assume that depending on what county you are in, and then where you are in Eagle County, you might be experiencing this incredible storm front that we're having come through. I have my door wide open, so if you hear the thunder or the wind, that's what it is. Gotta have these doors open on these summer nights. But yeah, it's been a interesting session, and I look forward to sharing some of that with you. But just so as many of you know, we were impacted by COVID like many of you were as well. And we've all been impacted in different ways. Some of us, we have had tragedy visit our doorsteps, and we've lost loved ones or friends because of COVID. Our jobs may have been impacted, but for the legislature, the impact that we saw was we took a break right in the middle of our session. We adjourned for the safety of those that visit and work in the building. And then when we came back, we had an abbreviated time back in the building of 3 weeks of working days, which means that many of the bills that we had been working on, we decided to sideline because we ended up having, even though we ended later than we normally would have, we ended up having a much shorter session than we would have. So that impacted a lot of things. It impacted what are the things that we focused on. It impacted what bills we put forth. It impacted what we focused on when we came back to the building. But I'm really proud that both Rep. Roberts and myself were able to advance some really important things for the mountain communities that also would benefit the entire state of Colorado. So we'll be able to talk about that more. And for those of you that are joining from Routt County and we may not have met before, I'm so glad to meet you guys. I don't represent Routt, I represent your neighbor to the south, Eagle County, as well as 6 other counties that have the great towns that you've all visited them, such as Leadville and Gunnison, Crested Butte, Buena Vista, Salida, and I stretch over to Delta and Paonia and all the way down to Lake City. So 7 counties that hug the Continental Divide in the western slope. But welcome to Routt and Eagle County tonight for this town hall. Thanks, Dylan.
Thanks, Kerry. And I echo everything that Kerry said. I understand, coronavirus has been particularly challenging for all of our communities here in the mountains. Eagle County got hit hard, both with the virus and the economic fallout, as did Routt, as did all of our counties that rely heavily on tourism. And we're happy with the way things are starting to recover, and happy with some of the work that we were able to do at the Capitol to help that part of our economy, but certainly know that nobody is out of the woods yet, and there's a lot more work to do. I'll just give a little update on how this legislative session played out and why it was different. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the piece of legislation that I worked on that was still able to get passed, and then Kerry will do the same. And then we'll talk about some general coronavirus legislation that got done, which will start helping the state right away. So normally, as Kerry mentioned, we're in session for 120 days, and those are usually 120 continuous days. That starts in early January and goes to early May. Everything was going as a normal session would, and Kerry and I were working on a big bill together, the bill to create a public option for health insurance in Colorado, and that got introduced on the same day, I believe, as the first coronavirus case was confirmed here in Colorado. And that was March 4th, I believe. And then we adjourned the legislature on March 14th because coronavirus was in Colorado significantly at that point, and we no longer felt it was safe to have everybody coming to the Capitol every day. We kept on that adjournment until May 26th, trying to make sure it was safe to go back, or at least as safe as possible. We did have to go back, though, because we had not passed our yearly budget yet, and that's something we're constitutionally mandated to do. So we went back on May 26th for 3 weeks of work. And in total, we ended up doing 85 legislative days, 85 or 86. So a lot less than the normal 120 days, as Kerry mentioned. But what we faced when we got back was a totally different reality than what we had left. First of all, we had to balance the budget. Unlike the federal government, we have to pass a balanced budget at the state level. We cannot deficit spend. We cannot print money. We have to balance the budget. And the economic fallout was so severe that we already faced a $3.3 billion deficit when we returned, that we had to find savings for to balance the budget. $3.3 billion out of about a $30 billion budget, but about, the legislature has control about 18 million of that. So it was almost 25% of our budget that we had to find savings in, which led to some really painful and difficult cuts that we can talk about, and then some legislative solutions to try to make up for those cuts as well. We also had to revamp and to bring in new ideas for legislation to respond to the coronavirus, and we got some really exciting bills done in that regard as well that we'll talk about in just a moment. We were still able to get a lot of work done either before we took a recess in March or afterwards with some of the bills that we had been working on prior to the session starting. And I'll talk a little bit about a few of those that were my bills. Some of them had Senator Donovan on them as well, which I'm thankful for having her as my senator. Whenever I send a bill from the House to the Senate, I know it's going to get passed, and hopefully she feels the same, vice versa. So the first bill I introduced this year was House Bill 1003, and this is the bill that will expand and extend the Rural Jumpstart Tax Credit Program. And this is a really great bill, coronavirus, especially now in the coronavirus world, because this is a bill that gives property tax and income tax incentives for small businesses to open their doors and hire employees in rural Colorado. And Routt County is one of the counties where the Rural Jumpstart Program is able to be used. And we do have a business in Routt County that has utilized the Rural Jumpstart Tax Credit, which is excellent. And we hope to have more businesses take advantage of this now that we passed this bill that opens up the doors a little bit. It was too restrictive in our opinion, and our bill will expand that and make sure that more businesses can take advantage in more parts of the state. So we're really excited. That got passed after we returned, and the governor is going to sign that in the next couple weeks and extend the program for 5 more years. Another really important bill that was actually an idea from here in Eagle County that Commissioner McQueenie brought to me was a bill that will open up more childcare spots because right now the law said that homeowners associations could prohibit home childcare businesses just because they wanted to. So we changed the law to say that just because you're in an HOA, just because your home's in an HOA, that in and of itself does not mean you can't open a home childcare business. Now, of course, you need to comply with all the other rules of the HOA, and you need to comply with state licensing requirements for childcare. But we're really hopeful that this is going to mean that more people can consider opening their homes for childcare businesses, which will help with the high cost of childcare here in the mountains, but also mean that people can have a place for their kids to go as they're trying to get back to work. One other bill I'll talk about that got started and got signed actually prior to the coronavirus recess was a bill that we've been working on for several years that will really help our mountain communities with our water resources. And this is a bill that expands and extends the in-stream flow program. This is a program that allows somebody to loan their water rights back to the river during dry years and not be in danger of losing their water right. But by loaning their water back, and the city of Steamboat Springs has taken advantage of this during really dry summers with the Yampa going through town, that means that we can keep river levels at a sustainable level, which promotes both the fish and the stream health, but also our outdoor recreation economy that relies on strong stream flows and downstream agriculture that needs the water to get down to them. So Kerry and I had worked on that for several years, and it got done this year, which we're really excited about, and hopeful that it will be a good tool moving forward to preserve our water resources. So those are some of the bills that are not necessarily related to coronavirus that I'm really happy I was able to introduce and get all the way to the governor's desk. One, I mentioned this earlier, that did not get to the governor's desk that we're going to continue working on is trying to lower the cost of healthcare here in the mountains, but across the state. And we've been working for several years to bring a public option for health insurance to Colorado. And we believe that this is an excellent way to lower the cost of healthcare because it's going to bring new competition to our communities. It's going to mean that people have more choices when they're purchasing health insurance. And it's an option, a more affordable option that's not tied to your employment status. So when you lose your job because of the coronavirus or for any other reason, that meant you often are losing your health insurance. And that should not happen in this state and in this country, in our opinion. And the public option is an important tool to get there. So we were not able to move that bill forward because of the budget shortfalls and not wanting to do anything to harm our existing healthcare infrastructure as they responded to this novel pandemic. But moving forward, we're willing to make changes and make adjustments to that bill to make sure it works, but we will keep working on trying to bring a public option to Colorado, and we'd be the first state in the country to do something like that. So we'll keep working on that. Like I said, it didn't get done this year, but looking forward to moving that forward. So Kerry, you want to talk about some of the bills that you were happy got passed before we talk about COVID related bills?
Sure, would love to. I think one of the bills that I'm really thrilled that we got across the finish line is the Rural Economic Development Initiative, READY. This was Senate Bill 2. And it was, I have to say, I really appreciate my Democratic colleagues in the Senate, who I'm the only one who represents rural Colorado in that Senate, but they all stood up with me early in the session and said, yes, this is an important bill and we're going to make it a priority bill. We're going to give it one of those first numbers. So it was Senate Bill 2. We did pass it. And this bill gives grants out to businesses for job creation. It has been an existing program, so some people might know about it. But we've been working on through the years to refine it and make sure it's really working for the people that we intended to use the money that the government has in a responsible fashion. And so I'm really glad we got READY passed. We're making sure that it will go through new jobs as its first priority. And we also did a move that I'm really proud of, is we made the tribes of Colorado eligible to apply for those grants too. So I've been taking on a personal responsibility of trying to make sure that our tribes that are mostly down in southwestern Colorado are included more often in the legislation that we write for the state. And so was really excited to have them included in this bill that will be signed into law next Monday, I believe, down in Pueblo. So really neat to get READY over the line in a really solid way. Also did some work on broadband. As most of you know, I've been working on that issue for quite some time. So we've been refining it this year as we kind of let some of the big bills that I've passed over the past couple years settle and see where we still needed to work. But we're still refining the language in the law to make sure that the money that we do invest in rural broadband is really going to unserved areas. And then I also want to touch base just real quickly, want to stay positive, but want to chat about some of the bills that we didn't get across the line this year because we had to reprioritize with COVID. Certainly public option was probably one of the hardest ones to decide that we needed to sideline for a couple months because we were asking a lot of our frontline workers at that time. And Dylan and I really value a stakeholder transparent process. And we couldn't ask our doctors and nurses who were in support of the bill and had some great ideas on the bill to come to the Capitol when we really needed them working in our hospitals. And we wanted to continue to work with the hospitals as well, but know that they had different priorities. So we were both anxious to take up public option again, and both think it's a great way to increase competition and lower the cost of healthcare for not only the high country, where we felt the rising cost of healthcare in the individual market most acutely, but really across the state. I also didn't get my Wolf bill across the finish line, which I'm really regretful of. I hope that it does provide a framework for implementation if the introduction of wolves passes on this fall's ballot. Who knows what the outcome of that vote will be, but we were able to get people that were on opposite sides of the issue into the same room discussing what it meant to actually have a PAC in Colorado, how we could pay for predation, what works best for the agricultural community. And so I'm hopeful that that work won't fall on deaf ears, and that the administration will look towards that bill for some guidelines on implementation. More work that we still have to do around the conservation easement program that is so critical to both Dylan and I's district. For Routt and Eagle County, conservation easements has been a critical way for our ranchers to maintain being ranchers, while the cost of land can elevate beyond their means as we watch our tourism communities grow. So conservation easements are an issue that's near and dear to both Rep. Roberts and I, and you have our commitment that we'll continue to work on that issue, even though that was another bill that we had to unfortunately sideline this session.
Thank you, Kerry. Some important bills that got done, as well as some ideas that are going to move forward in the future. So next thing we wanted to talk about was give you an update on bills that were sort of new ideas, essentially, when we got back to the legislature after the coronavirus pandemic had hit. And these are bills that respond directly to the crisis and help us either recover or prepare for the future. And so we obviously took a huge hit in our healthcare systems and in our economy. And so this package of COVID-related bills addresses both sides of that conversation. I'm going to run through a few of these, and we can talk more if you have questions. But some bills, like a bill that created access to earned sick time, which says that every employee can earn paid sick time up to 6 days a year if you're a full-time employee, up to 4 days if you're a seasonal employee. A bill that extends the use of telehealth services, which is really important for the whole state during a pandemic, but also for rural Colorado and not being close to providers. So that's a really exciting bill. We passed bills that extend money for behavioral health programs because, as we know, economic downturns and isolation cause some behavioral health, or cause more behavioral health issues. We expanded unemployment benefits through a bill. We allocated money to food pantries, which is incredibly important, as we know a lot of our food pantries got hit very hard with high demand. We passed bills that protect against price gouging during times of pandemic and crisis, and some bills that protect against extraordinary debt collection measures during pandemics, as well as housing assistance and programs like that to help people who have been hit very hard by the downturn. We also passed a few bills related to businesses and helping businesses, small businesses especially. I want to talk about two that were actually bills that I sponsored when we got back, and I know Kerry had a few of them as well. One was, this is House Bill 1421, and this is an idea that's directly from both Eagle County and Routt County, so I really love this bill. Separately, Eagle County Treasurer Teek Simonton and Routt County Treasurer Lane Icovetto contacted me about a week into the shutdowns in March and said, hey, we should try to figure out a way to let property tax interest payments be reduced or waived, so that we can give some of these businesses and property owners who have lost their revenue a little bit of a break when these property taxes come due. So we worked on that idea. We had many iterations of the bill, went back and forth, but we were able to get a bill passed that allows county treasurers to work with their commissioners to either reduce or waive the interest penalties on late property tax payments for this year alone. We protected education funding through that. There's no concerns on that front, but it will really help some small businesses who completely lost their revenue and might not be able to pay their property taxes right away. So that's one. And then the other one was an idea I heard from many local restaurants, including the restaurants that we were getting takeout from, is that they really liked the governor's executive order that allows restaurants to sell or deliver alcoholic beverages along with their food. So I worked on a bill with several of my colleagues that that will extend that executive order, whether or not the executive order itself is in place, until next July at least. So this has been a lifesaver for our local restaurants to add a little extra revenue. And a lot of restaurants have said that without this, they would have not been able to stay open or stay in business. So I'm really happy that we're going to be able to continue this revenue booster for at least another year. And then we'll reevaluate next year and see if we want to extend it any further. So those are two small business bills I'm really excited that I got done, as well as the package of bills related to coronavirus that we passed. And I know Kerry had a few on that topic as well.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a great bill that people should really stay tuned on, and I'll make sure to try to be sharing information on it as well. It is a small business recovery loan program, and what we're going to do with this bill, it's really innovative, is we had in place a premium tax credit that we could sell to insurance companies for to kind of have consistency in what they could expect their taxes to be. It had kind of fallen out of usage. And in discussions over the past months, our state treasurer kind of happened upon this premium tax credit again. And so we're going to take that premium tax credit, we're going to start that program up again, and we're going to use those funds to create a program to fund small businesses. So we know, or I should say we're concerned, that the federal government's programs might end before we see a full recovery. And we know that the state has a responsibility to fill in those gaps where we can. We also know that we have a challenge in the state of Colorado with the constraints of Tabor, of how much funds we have to start and invest in new programs. So this bill, again, it's 1413, if you guys want to look more into it, we'll be able to address both of those problems. We'll be able to have a new funding source that we dedicate towards helping small businesses. I'm also really excited that the work that we did early on in the bill added some language that will focus on our communities as a first source of expenditure. When it first was written, it was going to focus and be distributed by population, but we were able to get some language in there to talk about communities most impacted by COVID-19. So I'm very I look forward to what 1413 will be able to do for our communities over the coming months and years, actually. Will it be a silver bullet? No. Will we still have big challenges in front of us and hard times to come? Absolutely. But this is the type of bill that we were able to get done in those 3 weeks that we returned. I also want to highlight secure savings. And I know we have a bunch of questions, and we will certainly want to talk about those as well. But we are trying to summarize a whole session in this town hall tonight. So secure savings is another exciting bill that we got passed this session. I think it's been over 5 years that we've been working on that bill. I alone, I think, have carried it for 3 years now, working on the pathway to get it passed. And what secure savings does is it creates basically a state-run retirement program through a public-private partnership. So as many of us know that live in resort communities and in rural areas, you don't always have a traditional 401k that comes along with your employer, because many of us don't work for large employers that have that type of benefit. So what this program establishes is a savings program that you as an individual can subscribe to and start saving. And what the problem we're trying to address is a long-term one, is that we're seeing that many of the millennials and people even up into their upper 40s or 50s have less than $600 of savings to their name. So you can see if a crisis like COVID hits or something else happens, $600 in savings will result on you likely relying on the safety net of the government to survive. And so we're hoping that by the state initiating a secure savings program, we will in the long term not have a major crisis of people that don't have retirement savings when they reach retirement age. So I'm really excited about that program. It will take some time to roll out because it's so important we do it correctly, but keep an eye out for that because that's a really big bill to get done in Colorado. And once again, Colorado is leading the nation on these ideas. secure savings, public options, some of the other bills that we passed in these last 3 weeks, including our police accountability bill. We are leading the entire country on these ideas.
Thanks, Kerry. So I think that leads us into some of the questions that we're getting. I want to talk about education funding. We've gotten several questions about this, as well as some questions about ballot initiatives, and those two topics kind of go hand in hand. So like I mentioned earlier, we were facing a $3.3 billion budget deficit. And education, K-12 funding particularly, is about 25% of the state's budget. So there was it was going to be nearly, and it was impossible to not cut education at all when we're trying to balance such a large budget deficit. So there were hits to K-12 education. A lot of that came from adding to what's called the budget stabilization factor, which is sort of the debt that the state carries to our education obligation. We're hopeful that the cuts were not as severe as expected because we got help from the federal government. And so when we're talking about a lot of these programs, these bills related to coronavirus, we were thankful that the federal government was able to pass a few stimulus packages in a bipartisan way and help us with some of these really painful decisions. It wasn't enough. The federal dollars were not enough. We need the federal government, at least in my opinion, to act more on education funding. There was an article about how the Steamboat School District is going to fare, and they're facing some pretty significant cuts and layoffs. I know I've been talking to Congressman Perlmutter, who is trying to bring this up in Congress, and hopefully they can include education funding in their next stimulus package. So anybody who's concerned about that, I would encourage you to contact our members of Congress in both the House and the Senate. Like I mentioned earlier, the state cannot print money like the federal government can, and we need their help. We did find a few ways to try to add funding to education, though, through some of the bills that we passed. One is House Bill 1420. This is a bill that closes some of the tax loopholes that exist in Colorado for large businesses and large corporations, and that money is going to be dedicated to education. So it's estimated it's going to generate about $230 million, at least in the first year or so, that can be added to the state education fund. So House Bill 1420 is a really good start. We also passed a bill that has put a question on everybody's ballot this November to raise taxes on nicotine products. So this is cigarettes, cigars, and vaping products. All of that money would go to the education fund as well if that ballot initiative passes. So that passed in a bipartisan way. I believe that we have a strong coalition going forward to try and get that passed, but we'll look out for that on your ballot in November. And that could be a huge revenue generator for education. And then the third thing that we did in this regard is we passed in a very strong bipartisan vote a question that will be on your ballot to whether or not to repeal the Gallagher Amendment. So we could talk for many hours about the Gallagher Amendment, but long story short is it's an amendment that was put in our Constitution back in the early 1980s that creates a formula for property taxes. And when we've put Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, on top of Gallagher 10 years later, that caused a situation where districts like school districts, fire districts, libraries, other local services that rely on property taxes have seen their revenues decrease year after year after year. And they've had to go to their local voters and keep asking for mill levy increases to make up that shortfall. The question is on your ballot, should we repeal the Gallagher Amendment? Like I said, this had bipartisan support, and the person that it's named after, former state Senator Gallagher, he even thinks it should be repealed. And if it is repealed, we're going to see more funding come in for our local districts, including our school districts. So we hope that we can make up some of the education losses there. It was really hard to vote on a budget that cut education, but we, like I mentioned, we had to pass a balanced budget, and we're really looking for ways to try and fill in that gap over the coming years. And our members on the Joint Budget Committee on both sides of the aisle, I know, are really committed to protecting education as much as possible. So I hope that answers the questions. We could obviously go on for a long time. I want to answer one other question. Cookie asked about the paid sick leave bill and what that entails. So yes, it was 6 days a year maximum that you can accrue for a full-time employee and 4 days for a seasonal employee. that was what was decided. That was what was negotiated and come to. There's an effort to get a more robust paid family leave measure on the ballot this November, which would be more comprehensive rather than just earned sick time. But Cookie, yes, you can use this for other reasons than being sick yourself. It can be for family and medical reasons as well. So Kerry, I don't know if you've seen any other questions you want to answer, or any other topics you want to discuss, and I'll go look at the questions myself too.
Sure. Let me jump in on a couple that are coming in from Facebook. We have some wide-ranging questions, so that's great. I'll do my best to answer them. And we'll try to get back to you guys on any that we don't know the answers off the top of our head. Like Seth, I'm not sure when we'll get specific language for Gallagher, but I can get back to you on that and I'm sure pass it along. We had a question on why not do a mandatory mask law? Kind of two parts. Of course, at this point, we're not in session, so we wouldn't be able to do that. But secondly, we didn't consider it during the session because counties have been leading in the COVID-19 response first, but that's actually how it is structured in the state of Colorado, that if there's an emergency that our counties take the lead. So we've been trying to work and support with our counties, and I have to tell you, Eagle and Route have done an exceptional job over the past months on really showing how to lead in the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's why we did not pass a mandatory mask law. I know that the counties are constantly having discussions about this and re-examining it, but really making sure that it's the right fit for the right communities. So I hope that explains that. Let's see, what else did I want to touch? Oh, a couple questions on where we are with future federal funding and support. And I think there was a question of if there's any discussions about intra-state cooperation on responding to COVID-19. I don't know of any discussions around intrastate cooperation. I can reach out to the governor's office and see if they're having those discussions, but I'm not aware of any. That might be in the next phase when we kind of move to the isolation and now breaking the chain, and now like what do we do next for an economic recovery. In terms of future federal responses, the information that I'm getting from DC is that there isn't a willingness from both parties to move forward additional relief, and that there is just not alignment between the parties right now of what some next steps are. I know some of our local congressmen, our advocates from Colorado, are advocating for some extension of some of the current programs that could end in the coming days because they're set to expire in July. But unfortunately, I don't think there's bipartisan agreement on that process.
All right. I've seen a couple other questions come in. Doug Tucker asked about a sort of a civilian conservation corps type idea, which I think is an incredible idea and something that we should consider. Given our personal state's financial situation, it's unrealistic that we would be able to fund anything like that. But I am going to continue talking to our federal representatives about something like that. If there were another stimulus package, that's something that could certainly be included in that. I think an excellent way to create some jobs during this pandemic. I think general infrastructure would be great as well. I know I heard some talk of that at the beginning of these coronavirus stimulus packages that Congress was considering, but unfortunately have not been advanced. So the other question I'm seeing is about Senate Bill 163, and we'll talk about this. This was a bill concerning Colorado's vaccination rates and practices. And Tom, I understand your question and your frustration. I just want to make clear, Senate Bill 163 does not mandate vaccinations in the state of Colorado. It does not remove anybody's ability to get an exemption, whether medical or non-medical. All it does is formalize our exemption process. Colorado has the lowest vaccination rate in the country for kindergarten-aged children, which leaves us really susceptible to some severe outbreaks, including the measles, which we've seen already in our state. And so what Senate Bill 163 does is says that if you want to get an exemption for vaccinating your children, you still can do that. You just need to get either a note from a doctor or receive information from the Colorado Department of Health prior to submitting that exemption. So you can get an exemption for medical reasons or non-medical reasons, whether it's religious or personal belief, but it does not mandate vaccinations for anyone. So if you don't want to vaccinate your kids, if you don't want to get a vaccine yourself, nothing in Senate Bill 163 changes your ability to opt out. It just formalizes the process and actually is still even a lot less strict than what a lot of states require when you're entering your kids into public school. We did make an amendment on that bill that was able to get us support from the opponents of the bill when we were trying to work out the differences between the House and the Senate, which fully exempts homeschool children. So if you homeschool your children, you do not fall within the purview of Senate Bill 163, and you still have all of the medical freedom that you do before. And in my opinion, everybody still has the same medical freedom they do before. You just might need to talk to a doctor before you decide to let your kids go to school without a vaccine. So we're happy to talk more about that offline, but I hope that answers your question, Tom.
I got a question on interim committees, which if you ask that question, you are a wonky person who follows politics in depth. So our interim committees are, they can be either standing committees like water or transportation that Dylan and I both serve on, or they can be proposed committees like the school safety committee that met last summer. And these are committees that meet in the interim between when we finish session and when we kind of conclude our interim work in the fall so that bills can be prepared. We will not have any of our interim committees this summer. This was a decision that was made by our elected officials in order to save some money in the budget. So we wanted that shared sacrifice, and we thought it was more important to make sure that we didn't use staff time for interim. So we won't have those meetings this summer. I think we will continue to work on those issues, particularly with water, and I'll come back to that one. There is discussion of having some interim committees that are much more limited and focused in scope on the economic recovery of COVID-19. We haven't finalized that decision yet. I'm personally advocating for that because I think we need to stay on top of the issue, particularly of economic recovery, so that when we walk back into that building in early January, we have a set of ideas and plans ready to go, and that we're continuing to work with our congressional colleagues and the Governor Polis's administration and having a coherent and thoughtful response. So someone did ask about what's next for water in Colorado after the hard work we did to get the in-stream flow program in place. And what hard work in water means is normally multi-year efforts because of the complexity of water law in Colorado and the implications of what it means for a first in use right state. So I think that Dylan and I, as Western Slope legislators, and I represent the headwaters of the Arkansas as well, water is always at the front of our policy list of things to be aware of. Dylan, I don't know if you want to comment on this as well, but I certainly, an issue that I am very concerned of going forward is water speculation happening on the Colorado main stem. We will have ongoing negotiations between the states that are actually independent of the Colorado legislature, but I stay closely involved with them, of how the upper basin and lower basin states get to use the water of the Colorado. Now, as you all know, a lot of that water that gets negotiated between those states begins its travels down the river in our mountain homes. What I'm concerned about is, as people start to look at the challenging circumstances of climate change, an ever warming climate, an ever decreasing precipitation pattern, and a very quick spring runoff, all of those are adding to what could be someday a challenge of a call to Colorado. Other people are seeing that too, and so we're starting to see speculative behaviors around the Grand Junction area where people are buying up land in a buy and dry scenario. That is very alarming to me, because we know that agriculture doesn't exist without water. And if we have developers, and out-of-state developers, I'll add, going up there and buying up land just for their water rights because they know one day that water could have value, that's something that I think is very important for the state legislature to weigh in on. The other issue that I'll end with, and let Dylan comment on any interim or water ideas or problems that we need to solve, is I know that when I made a promise of really fighting hard of any other diversions from the Western Slope to support population growth on the Front Range. We are starting to hear rumblings of those type of discussions being back on the table. And you guys have my promise that I will fight tooth and nail in my capacity as a senator. And since water can last far beyond the 2.5 years that I have left in the Capitol, I'll advocate it for it afterwards, because we're starting to see and hear some rumblings of some big projects that would mimic the patterns that we've seen in the past, where they put big straws into our high mountain areas and take that water over to the eastern slope and plains, and we never see it again. So those are some things that are on my radar.
Yeah, water issues always on my radar as well, and we're lucky to have somebody like Kerry in the Capitol who really understands this from a lot of different levels. And you know, there's not a ton of legislators that understand water issues, and so we kind of work together collaboratively across the aisle on that. And I think we all, you know, we did pass that bill to look at how we can strengthen our anti-speculation laws. So I think that's also a huge issue, and we'll continue to focus and monitor. We're looking at some of the rulings and rules that come from the federal government and make sure that we are responding to those adequately and they're not having any adverse impact on our water quality or our water quantity in Colorado. And yeah, the water diversions continue to be a concern, and something that will, I'm sure, enlist anybody on this call's help, because when it comes to the Front Range versus the Western Slope, we're outnumbered, but we need to stay strong to prevent that from happening. I know I'll address, Dave has been asking some questions about an issue related to criminal law. I've talked to Dave, you and I on the phone. We've exchanged many emails. I'm always happy to continue talking with you. The idea that you brought forward is a good idea. We weren't able to get it done in our 3-week mini session because we had to focus on bills that were related to the coronavirus for the most part. And so we did not have the time or the amount of bills available to take that issue on, but I'm looking forward to continue talking with you over the interim as we move forward as legislators. So let's do one other check on questions, and we'll do a final call for questions. If anybody on the Zoom or Facebook, use the Q&A function on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook, and we'll see some questions coming in. Usually we go well over on these, but looks like people probably have had their questions answered or want to get out and enjoy the rest of the nice evening. But
Cheryl asked us about seeing some, looks like second homeowners or perhaps tourists in the Beaver Creek area not wearing masks, and how that could be addressed. Yes, as you kind of finished your text, that would be a county issue. The county right now is advising masks, but not mandating them at this time. I will certainly, this is a good reminder for me to continue to use my social media to remind people to wear masks. So thank you. I don't think I've done that in a number of days. So I will make sure to do that, especially as we're welcoming tourists and second homeowners back into our communities for the summer. But I think it's a delicate balance, of course, to figure out how to suggest behavior versus mandate behavior. And I believe that the county is always working on those issues of balance, of when to do that. And of course, oh, and I knew Matt Shear, our Eagle County Commissioner, who is online, would, if I talk long enough, he would wade in on this discussion. He has shared his phone number and email there if you guys want to discuss any more. And since this question came in from Facebook, we'll make sure to share that information with you, Cheryl. So thank you for bringing it up. I know it's always a discussion that is ongoing.
And on coronavirus and masks and coronavirus in general, I should say, just have to thank everybody who's on this call and our communities in general. I think, Eagle County got hit really hard, Route County not so much with the actual pandemic, but I think the reason why we have been continuing to reopen at a certain level is because of your leadership and sort of understanding that this takes all of us personal responsibility and understanding the severity of this, and to our local leaders like Commissioner Schur, and I know the commissioners in Route County, Commissioner Melton, Commissioner Corrigan, and all of our commissioners in Eagle County and across the Western Slope who have shown leadership and have made our counties examples for the rest of the state. I know the governor highlighted Eagle County earlier today, but we need to stay vigilant, and we don't want tourists coming in and bringing the virus here when it wasn't here. So keep us in mind, keep Senator Donovan and us in mind. We have a direct line to the governor's team. If you see something's happening, we're happy to share that with them and try to, if we need to slow down or if we at least need to get some information in front of them, we are happy to be that conduit as well. So as we continue to recover from this and move forward. So Kerry, maybe we should touch briefly on the police accountability bill. I know we sort of briefly touched on it, but maybe I could start talking. You could let us know if you have any additional thoughts. So one thing that did happen that wasn't necessarily coronavirus related during our mini session was, I think it was the second day we were in session is when the protests started in Denver around the killing of George Floyd and many other people for many years. And shortly after that, the Colorado legislature came together and a bill was introduced, Senate Bill 217, which is a bill called to Enhance Police Accountability. And it does a lot of major things. And we are the first state in the country that has passed a bill following these protests. And I think the reason why that happened so fast and we were the first state is because of all of your outreach and all of our communities coming together to show that, acts of violence by police against people of color or in general is simply not acceptable, and we need to do more. This was a very complex bill. It is a complex bill. As somebody who works in law enforcement myself in my other job, I heard from a lot of law enforcement officers, and the bill went a long ways from where it was introduced to where it actually passed. And by the time it passed the Senate 32-2, I believe, and the House 53-11. That's incredible bipartisan support. That almost never happens with bills, especially major bills like this. And that's because I think everybody recognized that we had to do something. And so we should be really proud of that. We're going to continue monitoring it and seeing how it works. But in general, this bill outlaws things like chokeholds. It makes that body cams are going to be mandatory by 2023, and that footage needs to be released, with certain victim protections, of course, to the public. It ends qualified immunity as a defense in civil actions against police officers. And it creates a tracking system to make sure that the law enforcement officers who are guilty of bad conduct can't go and get rehired somewhere else. It was a really incredible moments to see this all happen. I'm a white man, so I don't know what it's like to feel the prejudice of racism, but I learned so much from my colleagues who brought that bill forward and was happy to co-sponsor it by the time it was up for a vote. Kerry, I don't know if you want to add anything about 217.
A great summary. What I think I would add on it, particularly since it started in the Senate, was watching the immense number of stakeholder meetings back and forth and work that was done on this bill to get to where it was finally signed, it's different in really important ways. I would say it was so much different that I have a colleague, Sheriff John Cook, who's now Senator John Cook, who ended up supporting the bill at the end of the day. And he is always a fierce advocate on these types of bills, as being a former sheriff from Weld County. So to watch the work that he did on the bill, from his perspective, how willingness the sponsors that were carrying the bill were to getting it right, it was really one of those bills that showed what we can do with a shared goal, and when we kind of, perhaps drop the party behind our name and look for where we can align on shared values. And I think it is something we should really be proud of as a state, particularly in its final form. It is a model piece of legislation that respects how hard it is to be a good peace officer, while also trying to move forward some issues to address what happens when we see bad cops murder innocent people. So very proud of 217 and what it'll mean to the future of not just Colorado, but honestly, I think our country. So that was an unexpected, to be honest, piece of us returning to the Capitol. We did not anticipate taking on that issue, but it is also our responsibility as elected officials to respond to the voices that we hear. And just like Rep. Roberts said, one of the reasons that bill came to be is because the folks that elected everyone in that Capitol were demanding action in one form or another. And so we were able to utilize the 3 weeks that we were in the Capitol to get that piece of legislation done. And I think it's already signed into law. I'll flag one other piece about it, and then I'll conclude my comments on there. Is there was some work by Rep. Roberts and myself in regards to how it would roll out in rural areas, knowing that we have different budget constraints, just different timelines, though, and Rep. Roberts is always a really strong voice in this regard. And so the bill did move in a good direction for making sure that it wasn't just a big city bill, but that when we write bills for the entire state, that it would also work for smaller and rural communities that just look different from the larger departments.
And some huge local shout outs on that. I was in constant contact with Vail Police Chief Henninger, Sheriff Van Beek here in Eagle County, Chief Corey Christensen up in Steamboat, who were providing input, providing direct feedback on how the bill should specifically be changed. And I think a lot of their feedback is reflected in the final bill. So I want to thank them for that. Like Kerry said, it is incredibly hard to be a peace officer no matter what part of the state you're in, and we recognize that. And I think we have a bill in front of us that will accomplish the goals that we're trying to accomplish and create more equity and less violence in our state, while also honoring the important work that law enforcement does to keep our communities safe. So I'm just going to conclude. I don't see any other questions. You all know how to get a hold of us. We'll put our contact info in the chat. If not, please be in touch over this next few months. We're back home now. We're not at the Capitol, but we're still working for you. We want to bring your ideas into the next legislative session as we monitor coronavirus and how some of these bills that we pass play out. I know we're going to have to do more work, and I want to hear directly from you because, as I mentioned, a lot of your ideas end up in bills that get all the way to the governor's desk. So please be in touch. It really is an honor to represent all of you, even in these crazy and difficult times when we have to make some really difficult decisions that make nobody happy and are really hard for our state. It really is an honor to represent Eagle County and Route County in the House. And it's an honor to work with Senator Donovan. So I'll kick it off to you to wrap us up.
Well, thanks, Rep. Roberts. It really is a pleasure working with you as well. I am very protective of the bills that I write and start in the Senate, and I know sending them over in your good hands in the House, I can always trust that they will come out in very good shape at the end of the day with the strong voice of the mountain communities in rural Colorado embedded in them. Know that we are here for you guys. Even though our session is ended, we don't have staff anymore, we don't have an office, we both, it's actually a rarity in the General Assembly, but you're looking at 2 elected officials that go back to full-time jobs out of session. So we're a little bit of a rarity in that regard, but that doesn't mean that we don't also keep our full-time commitment to representing the people that that make up our district. So never hesitate to call or email us. It may take us just a little bit longer than normal to get back to you, but always, if you have an emergency that you need help on, make sure you give us a call and tell us that, and we will make time for you. I think the year ahead is, and we are going to rely on you guys to help us figure out those solutions. We already know that next year's state budget is likely going to be worse than this year's state budget. That's a hard reality to face. We know that the economic recovery in our tourist base rural communities is likely going to be more impacted than our counterparts on the Front Range or in Grand Junction. So, but know that you have 2 fierce advocates for you guys. We are in this to make sure that the voice of Eagle County and the voice of Routt County is always heard down at the Capitol, and we're always working for you guys. So I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish this past session, but that doesn't mean that we'll rest on our laurels, and we will keep working in the months ahead. So stay in touch.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.